Hi, and welcome to the Yes Tale Story Channel. How lovely to see you. My name is Jess, and in this episode, I will be reading The Box of Robbers by L. Frank Baum. If you like this video, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. That would really make my day. So make sure you're warm and snug, close your eyes and clear your mind from any worries. Take a deep breath. Let's begin. No one intended to leave Martha alone that afternoon. But so it happened that everyone was called away for one reason or another. Mrs. McFarland was attending the weekly card party held by the Women's Anti-Gambling League. Sister Nell's young man had called quite unexpectedly to take her for a long drive. Dad was at the office as usual, and it was Mary Ann's day off. As for Emmeline, she certainly should have stayed in the house and looked after the little girl, but Emmeline had a restless nature. "Would you mind, miss, if I just go across the road to speak a word to Mrs. Carlton's girl?" she asked Martha. "Of course not," replied the child. "You'd better lock the back door, though, and take the key, 'cause I'll be upstairs." "Oh, I'll do that, of course, miss," said the delighted maid, and left to spend the afternoon with her friend, leaving Martha all alone in the big house, and locked in on top of it all. The little girl read a few pages in her new book, sewed a few stitches in her embroidery, and started to play tea party with her 4 favourite dolls. Then she remembered that in the attic was a doll's house that hadn't been used for months, so she decided she would dust it off and put it in order. Filled with this idea, the girl climbed the winding stairs to the big room under the roof. It was well lit by 3 dormer windows and had a warm and pleasant temperature. Around the walls were rows of boxes and trunks, piles of old carpets, pieces of damaged furniture, bundles of discarded clothing, and other odds and sods of more or less value. Every well-organised house has an attic of this sort, I think, so you probably don't need me to describe it. The doll's house had been moved, but after a quick search, Martha found it tucked away over in a corner near the big chimney. She pulled it out and noticed that behind it was a black wooden chest which Uncle Walter had sent over from Italy years and years ago, before Martha was born, in fact. Mum had told her about it one day, how there was no key to it, because Uncle Walter wanted it to remain unopened until he returned home, and how this wandering uncle, who was a mighty hunter, had travelled to Africa to hunt elephants, and never been heard from since. The little girl looked at the chest curiously, now that it had by accident attracted her attention. It was quite big, bigger than Mum's travelling trunk, and it was studded all over with tarnished brass-headed nails. It was heavy too, for when Martha tried to lift one end of it, she found she could not move it one bit. But there was a place in the side of the cover for a key. She stooped to examine the lock and saw that it would take a rather big key to open it. At this point, as you may already suspect, the little girl longed to open Uncle Walter's big box to see what was in it. 'Cause we're all curious, and little girls are just as curious as the rest of us. "I don't believe Uncle Walter will ever come back," she thought. "I once heard Dad say that he must have been killed by an elephant. If only I had a key." She stopped and clapped her little hands together happily as she remembered a big basket of keys on the shelf in the linen closet. They were all sorts and sizes. Perhaps one of them would unlock the mysterious chest. She flew down the stairs, found the basket, and returned it to the attic. She sat down in front of the brass-studded box and began trying one key after another in the curious old lock. Some were too large, but most were too small. One would go into the lock but wouldn't turn. Another got stuck so quickly that she worried that she would never get it out again. But then, when the basket was almost empty, an oddly shaped ancient brass key slipped easily into the lock. With a cry of joy, Martha turned the key with both hands, and then she heard a sharp click, and in the next moment the heavy lid flew up on its own accord. The little girl leaned over the edge of the chest in an instant, but what she saw caused her to take a step back in amazement. Slowly and carefully, a man unpacked himself from the chest, stepped out on the floor, stretched his limbs, and then took off his hat and bowed politely to the astonished child. He was tall and thin, and his face seemed badly tanned or sunburnt. Then another man emerged from the chest, yawning and rubbing his eyes like a sleepy schoolboy. He was of middle size, and his skin seemed as badly tanned as that of the first. While Martha stared open-mouthed at this remarkable sight, a third man crawled out from the chest. He had the same complexion as his friends, but he was short and fat. All three were dressed in strange clothing. They wore short jackets of red velvet braided with gold, and knee breeches of sky blue satin with silver buttons. Wide ribbons in red, yellow and blue were laced over their stockings, while their hats had broad rims with a high peaked crown and yards of fluttering bright-coloured ribbons. They had big gold rings in their ears and rows of knives and pistols in their belts. Their eyes were black and glittering, and they wore long, fierce moustaches, curling at the ends like a pig's tail. "My, you were heavy," exclaimed the fat one, when he pulled down his velvet jacket and brushed off the dust from his sky-blue breeches. "And you squeezed me all out of shape." "It was unavoidable, Luigi," responded the thin man lightly. "The lid of the chest pressed me down upon you. I'm very sorry, though." "As for me," said the middle-sized man, carelessly rolling a cigarette and lighting it, "you must acknowledge I've been your nearest friend for years, so don't be rude." "You're not allowed to smoke in the attic," said Martha, who recovered herself at the sight of the cigarette. "You could set the house on fire." The middle-sized man, who had not noticed her before, turned to the girl and bowed. "Since it's a lady requesting it," he said, "I shall put it out." And then he threw the cigarette on the floor and extinguished it with his foot. "Who are you?" asked Martha, who until now had been too astonished to be frightened. "Allow us to introduce ourselves," said the thin man, flourishing his hat gracefully. "This is Luigi." The fat man nodded. "And this is Bernie." The middle-sized man bowed. "And I am Victor. We are 3 bandits, Italian bandits." "Bandits?" cried Martha with a look of horror. "Exactly. Perhaps the fiercest and scariest bandits in the whole world. said Victor proudly. "'Tis so," said the fat man, nodding gravely. "But that's evil," Martha exclaimed. "Yes, indeed," replied Victor. "We are extremely and tremendously evil. You probably won't be able to find 3 men more wicked than those who now stand before you." "'Tis so," said the fat man approvingly. "But it's not okay to be evil," said the girl. It's naughty." Victor looked down and blushed. "Naughty?" gasped Benny, with a horrified look on his face. "'Tis a harsh word," said Luigi sadly, and buried his face in his hands. "Well, I never thought," mumbled Victor, in a voice broken by emotion. "I never thought I'd be so insulted, and by a lady. Perhaps you didn't think before you spoke. You have to consider, miss, that our wickedness has an excuse. I mean, how are we supposed to be bandits without being evil?" Martha was puzzled and shook her head thoughtfully. But then she remembered something. "You can't be bandits anymore," she said, "because you're in America now." "America?" cried the 3 together. "That's right. You're on Prairie Avenue in Chicago. Uncle Walter sent you here from Italy in this chest." The bandits seemed greatly bewildered by this announcement. Luigi sat down on an old chair with a broken rocker and wiped his forehead with a yellow silk handkerchief, while Benny and Victor fell back upon the chest and stared at her with pale faces. When he had somewhat recovered himself, Victor said disapprovingly, "Your Uncle Walter has greatly wronged us. He's taken us from our beloved Italy, where bandits are highly respected, and brought us to a strange country where we don't even know who to rob or how much to even ask for a ransom." "This so," said the fat man, slapping his leg sharply. "And we had earned such a great reputation in Italy," said Benny regretfully. Perhaps Uncle Walter wanted to reform you," suggested Martha. "Are there no bandits in Chicago then?" asked Victor. "Well," replied the girl, "we don't call them bandits." "Then what shall we do for a living?" inquired Benny despairingly. "You can do a great deal in a big American city," said the child. "My father is a lawyer." The bandits shuddered. "And my mother's cousin is a police inspector." "Ah," said Victor, "that's a good job. The police need to be inspected, especially in Italy." "Everywhere," added Benny. "You could do other things," continued Martha encouragingly. "You could work on the streetcars, or become clerks in a department store. Some people here in Chicago even become aldermen for the council to earn a living." The bandits shook their heads sadly. "We are not fit for that kind of work," said Victor. "Our business is to rob." Martha tried to think. "It's rather hard to get positions in the gas office," she said. "But you could become politicians." "No," cried Benny abruptly. "We must not abandon our high calling. We have always been bandits, and bandits we must remain." "This so," agreed the fat man. "There must be people to rob even in Chicago," Victor remarked cheerfully. Martha was distressed. I think they've all been robbed, she objected. Then we can rob the robbers, for our experience and talent is beyond ordinary, said Benny. Oh dear, moaned the girl. Why on earth did Uncle Walter send you here in the first place? The bandits became interested. That is what we would like to know, declared Victor eagerly. But no one will ever know, for Uncle Walter was lost while hunting elephants in Africa, she continued with conviction. Then we must accept our fate and rob to the best of our ability, said Victor. As long as we are faithful to our beloved profession, we have nothing to be ashamed of. This so, cried the fat man. Brothers, we start now. Let's rob the house we're in. Yes, shouted the others and jumped to their feet. Benny turned threateningly towards the child. You stay here, he commanded. If you take one step, your blood will be on your own head. Then he added in a gentler voice, Don't be afraid. That's the way all bandits talk to their captives. But of course, we wouldn't hurt a young lady under any circumstances. Of course not, said Victor. The fat man drew a big knife from his belt and flourished it about his head. The blood, he exclaimed fiercely. The bananas, cried Benny in a terrible voice. Confusion to our foes, hissed Victor. And then the three men bent themselves nearly double and crept stealthily down the stairway with cocked pistols in their hands and glittering knives between their teeth, leaving Martha trembling with fear and too horrified to even cry for help. How long she remained alone in the attic she never knew. But then she heard the cat-like steps of the returning bandits and saw them coming up the stairs one after another. They all carried heavy loads of plunder in their arms, and Luigi was balancing a mince pie on top of a pile of her mother's best evening dresses. Victor came next with an armful of bric-a-brac, a brass candelabra and the parlour clock. Benny was holding the family Bible, the basket of silverware from the sideboard, a copper kettle and Dad's fur overcoat. Oh, joy, said Victor, putting down his load. It is great to be robbing again. Like heaven, said Benny, but then he accidentally dropped the kettle on his toe and immediately began dancing around in anguish while muttering swear words in the Italian language. We have so much treasure, continued Victor, holding the mince pie while Luigi added his spoils to the heap. And all from one house. This America must be a rich place. With a dagger he then cut himself a piece of the pie and handed the rest to his comrades, whereupon all three sat down on the floor and ate the pie while Martha looked on sadly. We should have a cave, remarked Benny. We need to store our plunder in a safe place. Do you know where there's a secret cave? He asked Martha. There's a mammoth cave, she answered, but it's in Kentucky, and you'd have to go by car for a long time to get there. The three bandits looked deep in thought and munched their pie silently, when suddenly they were startled by the doorbell, which could be heard easily even up in the remote attic. What was that? Demanded Victor in a hoarse voice, as the three scrambled to their feet with their daggers drawn. Martha ran up to the window and saw that it was just the postman, who had dropped a letter in the box and gone away again. But the incident gave her an idea of how she might be able to get rid of her troublesome bandits. So she began wringing her hands as if she was in great distress and cried out, "It's the police!" The robbers looked at one another with genuine alarm, and Luigi asked nervously, "Are there many of them?" 112, Martha exclaimed after pretending to count them. "We are lost," declared Benny. "We could never fight that many and stay alive." "Are they armed?" inquired Victor, who was shivering as if he was cold. "Oh, yes," she said. "They have guns and swords and pistols and axes and what?" demanded Luigi. "And cannons." The three evil men groaned aloud, and Benny said in a hollow voice, "I hope they will kill us quickly and not put us through torture. I've been told these Americans are painted Indians who are bloodthirsty and terrible." "This so," gasped the fat man with a shudder. Suddenly Martha turned from the window. "You are my friends, are you not?" she asked. "We are devoted," answered Victor. "We adore you," cried Benny. "We would die for you," added Luigi, thinking he was about to die anyway. "Then I will save you," said the girl. "How?" asked the three at the same time. "Get back into the chest," she said. "I will then close the lid so they will be unable to find you." The three robbers looked around the room, dazed and a bit unsure. But she exclaimed, "You have to hurry. They'll soon be here to arrest you." At that point, Luigi jumped into the chest and lay himself flat on the bottom. Benny tumbled in next and packed himself as close as possible to the backside. Victor followed, after pausing to kiss the girl's hand in a graceful manner. As soon as all three were inside the chest, Martha ran up to press the lid down, but she couldn't even make it close. "You have to squeeze down," she said to them. Luigi groaned. "I'm doing my best, miss," said Victor, who was nearest the top. "But although we fitted in it very nicely before, the chest now seems rather small." "This so," came the muffled voice of the fat man from the bottom. "I know what is taking up room," said Benny. "What?" inquired Victor anxiously. "It's the pie," answered Benny. "This so," came from the bottom in a faint accent. Martha then sat on the lid and pressed it down with all her weight. To her great delight, the lid closed, and jumping down, she used all her strength and turned the key. Now, this story should teach us not to interfere in matters that do not concern us, because if Martha had only stopped herself from opening Uncle Walter's mysterious chest, she wouldn't have had to carry all the plunder that the robbers had brought up into the attic all the way downstairs again. This is so.